Hello, and welcome to this video talking about blood. In this video, I want to talk about an introduction to blood as a tissue and the formation of blood cells. If you'd like a copy of these slides, go ahead and scan the QR code below. So what are some functions of our blood? Well, we really have three main functions: transportation, defense, and the maintenance of homeostasis. And really, the transportation and defense, in a way, can also fall under this maintenance of homeostasis, but we'll talk about them as separate functions. So what are we transporting? Well, the first thing is nutrients. When you eat something, you are going to absorb the nutrients, and then those nutrients need to get to your cells. So they're transported in the bloodstream. We transport gases like oxygen and carbon dioxide. We breathe in oxygen, that also has to get to the cells. Your cells make carbon dioxide, and then that has to get to the lungs, and so it's transported through the blood. We also transport hormones. Hormones are secreted by endocrine organs, and they usually travel to distant locations to have their effect. And so to get to those distant locations, they have to be carried by the bloodstream. And then we also have metabolic waste. Carbon dioxide is actually a metabolic waste, but anything that your body doesn't want to keep, it puts it into the blood, then it's transported to either usually to the kidneys to get rid of. Okay, defense. We're defending against two different things. First, against threats, whether it's an external threat like a bacteria or a virus, or an internal threat like a cancer cell. And this is usually going to use our white blood cells. And that's usually going to be part of our immune system. But we're also defending against or protecting against blood loss. This is going to use the blood cells called platelets and some proteins that are in our blood to help form a blood clot so that we can stop losing blood. So do you see how I kind of said that these can also fall under maintenance of homeostasis? Remember, homeostasis means the maintenance of a stable internal environment. So you want to keep your blood where it's supposed to be. That's maintaining homeostasis. Okay, but this category, what we're going to talk about is maintaining body temperature. So if you exercise, then we have mechanisms that are going to help you release heat by getting that blood closer to the skin surface. Your skin might turn red, you might flush, you might sweat a little bit more to get rid of some of that heat. We can maintain homeostasis by regulating your pH of the blood and also the pH of your interstitial fluids, because your cells do not like acids. And we can also help maintain the water content of the interstitial fluids and our body cells. We can do that by maintaining water balance, and we can also regulate the ion concentration like sodium and chloride and those kind of things in the body cells. Okay, what are some characteristics of blood? Well, we're going to talk about a couple. What color is blood? Well, blood is always red. And even though if you kind of look at your hand and you might see the veins and the blood vessels there, and it looks blue, really your blood is still red. It just looks blue because of the skin, and you're looking through it, through the skin to see those blood vessels. But it would be a bright red if there is oxygen bound to the blood, and it's more of a dull, dusky red if it does not have oxygen. Viscosity. Viscosity is a measure of how well something flows. So think about the difference between water, maple syrup, and honey. Water has a viscosity of 1, and then as it gets thicker and thicker and does not flow as easier, we get a higher number. So then maple syrup is kind of sticky and it flows a little bit slower. Honey is even slower than that, it's thicker. Well, blood has a viscosity about 5 times greater than water. So it is a little bit thicker. And this helps or determines how well it flows through your blood vessels. Another characteristic is its temperature. Well, we know body temperature is roughly 98.6 degrees Fahrenheit. That's kind of a textbook normal. However, just keep in mind that your normal might be a little bit different. but blood temperature is usually slightly warmer than body temperature. In Fahrenheit, about 100 degrees. In Celsius, about 38 degrees. pH. pH is very important for our blood, actually for our entire body, but the blood needs to stay within the pH range of 7.35 to 7.45. And after you watch these videos and after you understand a lot of these main homeostasis features of the blood, actually of the whole body, this number will be very, very important. You'll never forget it. Alrighty, how much blood do we have? Well, it's about 7% of your total body weight, but in volume, if we could measure it, it's anywhere from 4 to 6 liters of blood. And that's differences between males and females. Males usually have about 5 to 6 liters of blood, and females typically have about 4 to 5 liters of blood. And so here's a picture of 3 2-liter bottles. So, if you had a 2-liter bottle of soda, then here's 2 liters and here's 4 liters. So a female would have about 2 2-liter bottles of blood. Males could have another half to a whole nother bottle in their body. All right, so what is blood? Blood is a connective tissue, and a connective tissue has to have cells, living cells, surrounded by a non-living extracellular matrix. If it has those characteristics, it's a connective tissue. So blood falls into that category. And how do we know that? Well, we have some cellular elements, which are what we call formed elements or cells, red blood cells, white blood cells, and platelets. And it has a non-living extracellular matrix, which is the blood plasma. So in the cellular elements or formed elements, we have these red blood cells, white blood cells, and platelets. And if we look at a sample of blood that was taken from somebody, we have the hematocrit, which is at the bottom. If this is spun in a centrifuge so that we can get these measurements, these are the red blood cells. Then the white blood cells and platelets are in the middle in what we call this buffy coat. And then the blood plasma, typically mostly water, is going to be on the top. And you can see in these other examples, if a person has anemia, that means they don't have enough red blood cells. You can see that their hematocrit is much lower. Or if they have a condition called polycythemia, which means too many red blood cells, we can see that their red blood cell count or hematocrit is elevated. So this hematocrit is usually about 45% of the blood. And the buffy coat is usually less than 1%. So we're still roughly about 45% of blood is going to be these formed elements, which means the rest, the other 55, is going to be in the blood plasma. What makes up blood plasma? Mostly water. About 90%, 92% of your blood plasma is water. We're going to have some plasma proteins and other solutes in there as well. Now you see here, actually this hematocrit, we have some differences between males and females. The female has about 37 to 47% hematocrit, while a male has about 42 to 52% hematocrit. The difference in these numbers is because certain hormones are going to promote blood cell formation and some hormones do not. Males have androgens like testosterone. That's going to stimulate red blood cells formation, so they're going to have a higher hematocrit. Estrogen in the females do not stimulate red blood cell production, so they're going to have a lower hematocrit. All right, so that blood plasma, anywhere from 46 to 63% of the blood, again, depending on male and female, and about 92% of it is water. We also have those plasma proteins. There are lots of different proteins in the blood. One are called albumins. Albumins help maintain osmotic concentration. Osmotic is how much water is in the blood. And it also helps transport lipid molecules. Remember that lipids do not interact well with water. And so if you're going to transport a lipid in the blood, which is 92% water or of the blood plasma, you're going to need to bind it to something, and you're going to bind it to a protein, which is an albumin. We also have some globulins. They do the same things, but they also can act in immune responses because antibodies are globulins. When we talk about the lymphatic system, we'll talk about immunoglobulins, which are the different classes of antibodies. Another protein is fibrinogen. Fibrinogen is kind of the precursor, the proteins that are needed for making the blood clot. Let's see, most enzymes are proteins, and so if you're going to have an enzyme, it's going to be a protein and floating in the plasma. And also hormones. There are some classes of hormones that are proteins. All right, other solutes in the blood plasma. Things like electrolytes, sodium, potassium, and calcium. Remember that an electrolyte is something that, when it's dissolved in water, will conduct an electrical charge. And our body really needs those electrolytes because your nervous system and your muscular system all need the electrolytes because they kind of run on electrical charges. We can have some of those nutrients. Remember that when you eat something, you're going to get a nutrient, things like proteins, lipids, and carbohydrates. And also any of those waste products, carbon dioxide, urea, and urobilins. Okay, so that's the plasma. Well, what about the formed elements? And again, based on males and females, anywhere between 37 and 54% of the blood is going to be these formed elements. And these are made up of red blood cells, white blood cells, and platelets. Well, these are also kind of more medically called erythrocytes, leukocytes, and thrombocytes. So red blood cells are erythrocytes, and that's what almost all of these kind of pinkish, reddish cells are that we see on this slide. They're round. We're going to talk about them in another video, but they have kind of they're almost like a donut shape, except the hole in the middle of the donut doesn't go all the way through. Then we also have leukocytes, which are the white blood cells, and here are two different types. This is one type of leukocyte, and these two are the same type of leukocyte. Now keep in mind, do not confuse leukocyte, which is just a general term for all white blood cells, with this bottom one called a lymphocyte. That is one specific type of white blood cell. We have 5 different types of white blood cells: neutrophils, eosinophils, basophils, monocytes, and lymphocytes. And we'll talk about all of those in another video here in the blood, and we'll also talk about them again in the lymphatic system. Now, platelets are sometimes called thrombocytes, and that's these little purple dots that we see scattered around the slide. Those are all platelets. Okay, so how is blood made? Well, the formation of blood is called hemopoiesis. Hemopoiesis. And this is the formation of all blood cells. And it all starts out with this hemocytoblast. And this is going to be found in red bone marrow. In an adult, red bone marrow is found in the shoulders and the hips, very few places. But this hemocytoblast is going to differentiate or divide into 2 different types of cells. We're going to have lymphoid cells and myeloid cells. This lymphoid stem cell is going to eventually become all of our lymphocytes. These are lymphocytes. The myeloid cells are going to become all of our other types of blood cells, which is the platelets, the red blood cells, and the other 4 types of white blood cells. Now, once you have these myeloid and lymphoid stem cells, we have another kind of level of maturity, and these are sometimes called progenitor cells. And you notice that all of these end in the word blast, so megakaryoblast, proerythroblast, myeloblast, monoblast, and in this case, blast kind of means an immature cell. And so these are going to become the mature cells. When do they know that they need to become these mature cells? Well, we're going to have these things called hemopoietic growth factors. Hemopoietic growth factors. These initiate the development of those blood cells from the cells that have the blast into their final blood cell. Now these growth factors, we have three main types of these growth factors. One's erythropoietin. We should be able to tell that that's going to stimulate erythrocytes or red blood cells. Thrombopoietin, remember that platelets are sometimes called thrombocytes, so that's going to stimulate the platelet formation. And then cytokines, we have two kinds, colony stimulating factors and interleukins. And these are going to help develop all the white blood cells. So hemopoiesis is just the formation of all blood cells. Erythropoiesis is specifically the formation of red blood cells, and this is stimulated by that hormone erythropoietin. And interestingly enough, it's secreted or released by the kidney. Now, what does the kidney have to do with your blood cells? Well, the function of the kidney is to filter your blood, and it does not go through and count, like, oh, there was 1 and 2 and 3 and 5 million and 6 million red blood cells. It doesn't do that. But what it does register is how much oxygen was being carried on that blood. And if there's not enough oxygen on the blood, your kidneys assume that you don't have enough red blood cells to carry that oxygen. So the reason that the kidneys release erythropoietin is in response to hypoxia, which is hypo meaning low, ox meaning oxygen, ia, conditioner in the blood. So low oxygen levels, hypoxia. Why might a person have hypoxia? Well, one is anemia. There's several different types of anemias, but you could have anemia because of blood loss. You could have iron deficiency anemia. There's sickle cell anemia, lots of different kinds. Maybe there's a reduced blood flow to the kidney. Maybe there's a blockage somewhere. Or you even have blood loss, which would mean not as much blood going to the kidney, so it would recognize not enough oxygen, which is the reason, or because there is not enough red blood cells. Low atmospheric oxygen, so if someone goes hiking on a mountain or you go visit Denver for a while, they have lower atmospheric oxygen. And so your kidneys are going to recognize that, release erythropoietin to increase your red blood cell count. Or a person might have had lung damage, because if you damage your lungs, you're not going to be able to, might be able to breathe in the oxygen, but it's not going to get into your blood properly, and so then your body's going to think you don't have enough red blood cells. All right, now thrombopoietin, that is the factor, colony stimulating factor or a growth factor that's going to trigger this megakaryocyte. So that megakaryoblast is going to develop into a mature megakaryocyte, and that's going to trigger the formation of platelets. One of the reasons we don't say, or blood cells are more correctly called formed elements, is because platelets and erythrocytes don't have a nucleus. And really, to be a cell, wouldn't you have to have a nucleus? Platelets are little fragments breaking off of this megakaryocyte, and so we have these little tiny fragments called platelets. Now, we already talked about erythrocyte for erythropoietin. Colony stimulating factors are going to trigger the myeloblast and the monoblast to develop into a monocyte. The myeloblast is going to become the basophil, neutrophil, and eosinophil. There are some other types of colony stimulating factors as well, but this is as far as we're going to talk about them in this video. All right, and that's the end of this video. All images in this presentation came from Anatomy and Physiology textbook by OpenStax, unless there was a reference listed on the slide.